The revelation by Malam Nasir El-Rufai, former governor of Kaduna State, that he tapped the phone of Nigeria's NSA Rubadu before his arrest has reopened uncomfortable questions about power, privilege, and Nigeria's security architecture. Tonight, we will be unpacking rather than chasing gossip. We'll be interrogating power. And to do this with us is our socio-political commentator, Jared Deskia. It's a pleasure to have you here once again, sir.
Thank you. Good day.
Uh, let's start simple. Is this revelation shocking because it's illegal or because it was admitted?
I think that it's shocking, really, and mind-boggling on more than two levels. So, uh, the fact that somebody can actually admit to hacking or tapping the conversations of any other person, of any other Nigerian, without legitimate warrant of a court, for instance, itself is very shocking to admit that. Not only because it is illegal to do that, but it also speaks of impunity, of a disdain for the rule of law and for due process. Now, what makes it doubly shocking is that this is not an admission by any ordinary person, a criminal, a tout on the street, a gang boss on the street. This is an admission by a politician who has played at the highest level and who is still playing at a very high level. A former governor, who is also a former minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and chief security officer of a state, admits this openly, but does not just is not just saying that, look, I have the capacity to, and I did hack the conversations of my opponents, my other political opponents, but actually of the national security advisor of the country. That's the national security advisor that's the office that coordinates the security architecture on behalf of the president in the country. And so to have the guts to actually uh, not just undertake the action itself of hacking, but to actually then publicly admit it, and in a boastful and nonchalant manner, speaks volumes to to the way and manner in which politicians think that the Nigerian state is their estate, their personal estate, and that they can do whatever they like with it.
So, are we saying the problem in Nigeria isn't just the abuse of power, but the audacity to confess it?
Absolutely, and you see, and there is a link between the two. Now, if you are used to serially abusing power, so I mean, for example, let's use crime now, as analogy, since we are talking security. It's also about crime. So let's use crime about that. When you have cases about when they say that somebody, for example, is a serial rapist, somebody is a serial killer, somebody is a serial trafficker, drug trafficker, and the rest of that. And then eventually the person is caught, and you build a case for the person. You see that what has happened over time is that the person has abused, has violated over time, but because when they do that, they get away with it. It builds this confidence to say that one is untouchable. And so exactly this is what is happening in this scenario, in this case now. So this is revealing of a personality type that believes that they are untouchable, that they cannot do wrong, that the violation of the law is what other people do, not themselves, and that what they do, regardless of what the law says, is correct and is right. And so when people have been accustomed to doing that, then they can have the audacity to actually publicly admit it. And this it begs the question, really. If somebody can admit to that, it begs the question, what else the person has been doing.
If a governor of Nasir El-Rufai's stature could allegedly tap the phone of a man heading the sensitive anti-corruption apparatus of Nigeria, should Nigerians feel protected or exposed?
So now that's a big challenge. Protected, I think it's I think most Nigerians will actually say they already feel that their protection is shaky, even as it is at the moment. And you see, the funny thing about some of the way these things happen, that's because you have asked this question. It's important to actually dwell on the point I want to make now, is that when people, and particularly politicians, political office holders and politicians, politically exposed persons, when they act in manners that actually undermine institutions, societal institutions, uh, the most important thing to do is to recognize that as as a grievous incident, and to treat it as such. But unfortunately, when that happens, it's always taken within the context of the political sentiments around, and the rest of that. And so people don't look at damage that is done to the institutions. They just look at the individuals at play. So you find online, you find some persons really don't feel that this is a big deal. Some persons are actually cheering this on and thinking that oh yes, it means that we can checkmate this government, and so on and so forth. But that's the danger that happens when we substitute our institutions for individuals and our political opponents. So, because what this simply means, and I want to throw this open to people. What this simply means, this is not just about. So, this is not just about the national security advisor right now and the security architecture of the country. What this means is that people who have the capacity, the wherewithal, the audacity to do it, and the audacity to be able to bold about it, it means they can also actually hack financial systems. It means that they can hack, or any other platform, digital platform, and so on and so forth. So it means that they have the capacity and the ability to do that if they want to do it. And for individuals and not the state to have that ability and to have that power is very dangerous for the country. So it's something that has to be checked.
So, yes, based on what you just said about hacking a certain instrument of governance, um, electronic transmission has been the conversation now, and particularly where Malam Nasir Rufai is leaning towards, people from that camp had actually pronounced through protest that they want e-transmission. With this NSA hacking and the e-transmission protest, can't is it normal to say, not sound like conspiracy theorists, that the opposition has the ability to actually manipulate what they're asking for?
So before I expatiate, I would first of all just say that I will not say the opposition. I will say that what is clear is that certain individuals
All right.
have that capacity to do this. And people forget one thing. In the 2023 elections, the former Minister of Communications, who was former NITDA boss, I've forgotten his name again, this
Pantami.
Professor Patami, yes. At that time when the election results were after when all of those things were happening, and when the court cases were on, the communications minister NITDA actually released the report about the election, and that some of the glitches faced by the IRF board was because of hacking. That in fact, on the day of the presidential election, that more than 1 million hacks were made on IRF. People forget this kind of things. So it was easy to just dismiss that and say, "Oh, these are people who wanted to rig the election, so they are saying this." But is it possible for that to happen? It is possible for it to happen. And do you have the capability and the capacity to be able to then prevent that from happening? That stands to reason. And then, so let's now talk about electronic transmission, because it's important to actually talk about electronic transmission. Uh, the conversation around electronic transmission is being deliberately confused, just like the conversation around tax, and probably by both sides, being deliberately confused. I use the word deliberate confusion, because to be clear about one thing, what does electronic transmission mean? Electronic transmission is not the same thing as electronic voting. Electronic transmission does not mean electronic voting. In fact, the Supreme Court has made that very clear. There's a distinction between to vote electronically and to transmit results electronically. Now, to have real-time transmission of results, in real time, requires you to have real-time e-voting. So as you are voting, the platform is tabulating it, and so you can be seeing it's changing. That's real time. Real-time e-transmission is not possible.
More like on screen.
Yes, it's not possible without real-time e-voting. That has to happen for that. So it means that your what was that? The beavers, right? That as you are voting, it is electronically recording it and transmitting and tabulating it and transmitting. That's what, and it means that it's an electronic something that you are voting electronically. Now that's not what we are doing. So if you are not doing e-voting, there is no way you can have real time, which is happening at the same moment. The only thing you can have is the next closest thing to real time is to have that once it is collated
in the form EC,
and in those collation centers. Once it's, so for example, at the polling unit first, once it is collated, and then you go to the collation center, it is collated and you feed data. That's when it can then be transmitted electronically. That's electronic transmission now to IRF, which is the viewing board. And then, and the viewing board does not change automatically after you have transmitted it. You still have to do the calculation. The collation. There's still an algorithm there that does the collation at the back end that does all of that. So that's what it means. And so people should start confusing Nigerians about and putting expectations on realistic expectations. And I've asked this question severally elsewhere in the world. Give me an example of a country in the world where their election is done mainly by electronic voting, where they have electronic voting, where people still don't have to go and queue and do this. Because electronic voting, you don't really have to, you may not have to go. You can jolly well vote from your app and the rest of that. Yeah. So give me an example of any country in the world, including the so-called advanced countries, where there is no paperwork, where you don't have to keep paper documentation in order to back up what is on the electronic. So if something should happen to the server, how do you resolve that crisis? Because the people who are saying don't use form EC, don't use all these forms, just transmit. If something should happen, maybe a glitch happens. Maybe the glitch is even now a glitch that is electronic. It's not malicious. Even that alone, what happens? How do you get the backup? How do you so what do you use
as a reference?
Actually, it seems to me like people are simply just trying to prepare the ground for anarchy, because then if something then happens, you have that kind of situation, and then you cannot even Kenya, that where people make reference to in terms of real-time transmission. And what happens? The real-time transmission that happens in Kenya is a kind of real-time transmission that is envisaged by our new law, by the law in 2023 and the new law now, that after you have collated, you transmit, which was why it was possible when that election result was contested. It was possible for the opposition, led by Raila, to gather the papers, yes, and then go to court. Otherwise, they would have had to go to court to ask for warrant, to look at the server and all of that, which really is neither here nor there. So people should be very clear about that. But having answered that question and clarified this, so the question now is this: if we already have people with the capacity to hack some of the most secure lines in the country, because there shouldn't be any more secure line than that of the security advisor. Probably only that of the presidency should be more secure. Now, if you have people who have the capacity to act that and can audaciously and openly boast about it, what do we say about hacking IRF? Eh? And then and because people can hack IRF and actually post wrong figures to confuse the situation, and people think that when you have a problem, that the solution to it is to throw technology at the problem, at the problem. No, technology is as good and as useful as the people who use it. Technology is there to help you, to make things easier for you. If you are the one using the technology and you want to use it wrongly, you will use it wrongly. So the fact that because technology is very neutral, it is, in this case, it is neither good nor bad on its own. But it can be put to good use, it can be put to bad use. People forget that Donald Trump is still disputing the 2020 elections, even though there have been 2 elections after that. He's still disputing the 2020 elections. And if those paper trails were not there, those counts were not there, he would have been able to really discredit the elections as there. But on each occasion, there were more than 147 lawsuits challenging different results in different places, all of which were dismissed by the courts. And so when people talk about the courts also dismissing cases here, and they say electorate, and they say that it's the judges that are determining. I mean, it's like people have a selective amnesia, that they're not really looking at the facts of the case. It's like the Supreme Court said during all of those rulings, they were ruling on the point of law. So if you claim, for instance, that you won this election and that your votes were taken from you and awarded to the, it's your duty to prove it. It's not the duty of the Supreme Court or the defendant to prove that. It's your duty to prove it. Now, if you claim that you won the election and your votes were taken, and meanwhile you had what is it called? What do they call the agents? You are polling agents in only 40,000 out of 230,000 polling units. How can you then prove that such an election, was rigged?
On what basis?
On what basis do you prove that? And that of the 40,000 agents that you said, you brought 16. You brought 16 to court as witnesses. Okay? You brought 16 to court as witnesses. All of these 16, none of them testified about their own specific polling unit. They testified about polling units elsewhere, which under the law is hearsay. So the point I'm making is that, look, if you don't allow for this backup documentation to happen and the rest of that, then how do you resolve a crisis, that emerges? How can any court be able to then make any legitimate ruling on that thing? Except, of course, what people are calling for is that they want to instigate a constitutional crisis.
So, if politicians of this magnitude, because during Buhari Atiku's court cases, there was a conversation around server.
Yeah.
Now again, before the election again coming up 2027, there's a problem of hacking the security architecture's phone or lines. What exactly separates Nigeria from surveillance state run by private interests? If a politician of high repute, such as these two examples, can actually penetrate intelligence channels or state security channels, such as this. And someone like El-Rufai, with what he has just done, shouldn't he be prosecuted really by our laws?
Let me respond to the last question first. Let's be very clear about this. If an ordinary person goes on TV, just say an ordinary person or just an activist who is not a politician, goes on national TV to say that they act the line of the commissioner of police, not the NSA, of the commissioner of police, and that they heard him, he was doing this, and that they have proof. Where do you think that person would be right now? The person would have been picked up. There will be issues around investigations, prosecution around it now. And and it would have been legitimate to go through. It would have been due process to go through. In fact, the only thing that is keeping El-Rufai out now is because he's a politician and he's a politically exposed person. That's the only thing, and that he plays a big role in the opposition. And so the idea that you don't want to fall into the narrative of suppressing
Or witch hunting.
or witch hunting the opposition just when elections are around the corner. So it's like
Sorry,
it's really like holding the country hostage and
but
ransom.
shouldn't the law supersede
It should.
the narrative of witch hunting?
Absolutely, it should. But then, politicians will always be very careful about narratives. So that's the point that I'm making, because that's why I made this that I said that, look, if this was an ordinary person that has done this, the person would be in detention right now. We would probably have been even brought to court for the first appearance in court in terms of it. But people of this level who abuse their leverage, who abuse their exposure, who abuse their authority, are the ones who are actually undermining the state, the institutions of the state. And that's why I've said elsewhere, particularly when we talk in civil society and even with the media, when we talk about Nigeria's election and the rest of that. And I said, look, the biggest risk to Nigeria's elections is not the Electoral Act, it's not the electoral law, it's not the constitution, it's not the electoral management body. The biggest risk to Nigeria's democracy is the Nigerian politician. Because if we get the Nigerian politician right, then nobody will be deliberately undermined. Politicians in Nigeria actually vote resources, deliberately to undermine political processes. So when people do this, you can see that they are actually the danger. It's not the process itself that is a danger and a threat. It's these people who are actually the danger and who are the threat. And until Nigerians realize this and begin to hold our politicians accountable, begin to separate between the politician and the institution, so that we safeguard our institutions and deal with the individuals and the politicians, we are going to continue to be in problem as we are today. Should anybody who admits to this kind of thing, should that person not be prosecuted? Of course, the person should be prosecuted. The only reason why this person is not being prosecuted today is the reasons that I've given you. And again, let us also be clear about one thing. Now, the reason why people like this also do what they are doing, and I think we've had this conversation before, but maybe we can throw a bit more light on it, is that one of the reasons why the Nigerian state, why governance is dysfunctional in Nigeria, appears to be very dysfunctional in spite of good intents of some individuals, and so why sometimes it seems like no matter what you do, nothing is working and nothing is changing. It goes back to these politically exposed persons. We have a ruling political class in Nigeria that, one, does not agree amongst itself, so it does not have a minimum consensus. So there's no national consensus that they are all committed to and loyal to. They are not loyal to Nigeria, they are loyal to themselves, and they are different segments. So Nigeria, and so when you have a majority of political actors this way, it's not as if there are no nationalist Nigerians amongst them, but that we have a majority, you have the playing ground, which is like this. Now, what they also do is that every political actor, give somebody, even if it is a politically appointed position, not even that you have won. Every politically exposed person who is a political office holder, you know what they try to do? They try to convert that aspect of the state that they control. They try to convert it into an instrument for their personal service, not the service of Nigerians. And so you have a state that is therefore that has been, if the Nigerian state was just captured by the ruling class, a ruling class that has a national consensus, it would have even been better. But you have a Nigerian state that has been captured by different segments of the Nigerian ruling class, and so each segment controls different. Each faction of the ruling class controls different segment of the state, and so the state cannot act as a state. So you look at security, you look at this. Uh, if people are doing this, by what stretch of the imagination can the state and security architecture actually act, in a uniform manner?
With this scary picture, how then can we have a conversation around democracy and rule of law when certain individuals admit to weaponizing state machinery?
For me, the biggest problem with abuse of office, uh, is the audacity and the impunity. But impunity grows from where? Impunity grows from lack of of response. If people can do things and get away with it, then of course you are laying the foundation for impunity. You are laying the foundation for abuse. But if every action, okay, has a consequence. So if it's a positive action, that's a positive consequence. If it's a negative action, that's a negative. If every action, every choice that we make, if it has consequences, and if some people are not excluded from those consequences, then we would be able to get it right. And it seems to me like the way the Nigerian state has now been paralyzed, it takes all of us as Nigerians and citizens, to start becoming more institution focused than individual focused, and to start protecting Nigeria rather than protecting whichever politician we think we are loyal to. If an institution has been compromised, can we deal with the compromise of that institution? Without, irrespective of the sentiments that we may have. And so that for me is the biggest thing. But this also requires leadership. So citizens are not just going to wake up and do it. It also requires, leadership for that to happen. Where is that leadership going to come from? Some people have to really take the bulls by the horn.
At the core of events like this, controversies such as this, is money. The conversation about money springs up again. Does this episode, just like the server conversation, the last election, last two elections, does this episode reinforce the belief that wealth in Nigeria doesn't just buy comfort, that it buys institutions?
I think the it's the other way around. I think the Nigeria's ruling elite are interested, in taking over institutions because it enables them, to accumulate, and protect wealth, ill-gotten wealth. So the institutions, that's why they weaponize and instrumentalize the institutions for their own personal gain, because that's how they make ends meet. That's how they make their wealth. That's how, and protect the. So if you acquire wealth, illegally, okay, then you also need to be able to protect it. So you need the institution not only to acquire the wealth illegally, you also need the institution in order to be able to protect that illegality, which is why you find the politically exposed in Nigeria, they are never outside the corridors of power. Once they are outside the corridor of power, you can actually see a visible decline in their status, in their wealth, in that, because that's the only thing that they do. You know. So, and I guess for me that part of what this, I think this is a challenge for two groups or three groups really of citizens. I think that active citizens in civil society, in the media, need to band together, and become more politically active. I think that business people, particularly those, who, of course, I mean, they may have benefited from patronage from politics, but are actually business people and investor people. I think it's high time they also become very interested in politics, so that they can sanitize politics, so that even their own wealth that they are actually making in more legitimate ways can actually be safeguarded. Because otherwise, these people who are making illegal wealth would simply crash everything for them. And then the third level of people that I think also needs to be able to do this after citizens and after the business people. I think that it is also high time that Workers, organized workers, should become first, workers as workers should become conscious of their role as citizens, of the fact that everything that pertains to their working conditions is actually determined in the political arena, the governance, and so to become politically conscious in their own interest. Because right now, it's not as if workers are not politically active, but they are active in the interest of other people, not in their own interest. Because if they were organized politically, they organized in their own interest, then even when they are supporting people, they will be bargaining. They would have a platform. So when I say bargaining, they are not bargaining for position. Oh, you give me this thing. They are bargaining in terms of policies. They are bargaining in terms of what we want,
Direct impact.
direct impact we want on our lives if we give you our support. We need to get to that point, and for me, that's actually the way to save Nigeria's democracy right now.
Politics, national security. Where do we draw the line?
The two are really very. So I mean, ordinarily, when you look at national security as citizens' security, then it should trump politics. But when people see nation, than those who see national, who see politics, who see national security as their own security, eh, then they merge the two. They merge politics and national security, because national security is really not. It's not the security of the state. It's not the security of the regime. Eh? It's not the security of the wealthy. It's the security of the nation. Okay, so if we can see national security in that context as the security of the people and the rest of that, then politics should not be played in a manner that undermines that national security. But if we see national security as our security, then of course, as our individual security, because we have leverage, because we have status, then of course our politics will be played in a manner that we subordinate that national security to the interest of politics.
How has this El-rufai saga impacted on our image when it comes to security conversations in the global space?
I'm sure that people would ask questions. I mean, because let's be honest. So it's not as if these kind of things don't happen in other places. Okay, that politicians don't try to. They do. The difference is the extent to which you can actually do it, eh, and be audacious about it, and be boastful about it, and then get away with it. That's the difference. Because otherwise, in every polity, people want to abuse power, except you don't just put guardrails, but you're also vigilant, to ensure that. I mean, in the US today, we can say with all degree of certainty that the current president of the US is abusing his powers in the US, and the things the executive decisions that he's taking, almost sometimes usurping the role of Congress, and also usurping the role of the courts and the rest of that, and so on and so forth. Is that? But you can see the pushback, the institutional pushbacks. That's because they will not allow it to happen, and they are fighting it and they will stop it. So that's the difference. And so in our case, in this kind of situation, the danger inherent in what has just happened, huh, is not that it is not happening and being covered, but that it has happened this brazenly, and it is allowed to go. The danger is that you are setting a precedent, because other people can also do it, and then when they do it and you go after them, they will say, but El-Rufai did it the last time. This other person did it last time. Why didn't you go after this person? Because you remember, look at our anti-corruption war. If you go after somebody says it is witch hunting, that you didn't go after this, after all, you didn't go after this other person. So when are we going to start? And where are we going to start from? Because that fight has to start from somewhere. And a friend of mine, isn't Wagu, would say this. He says that when they talk about witch hunting, he said yes. He said let every regime be a witch hunter. If every regime actually owns witches, what it means is that progressively there will be less which is to hunt. So if every regime decides to go after people who are corrupt, they may be in the opposition, but they are also not going to be in power forever. So when the other people also come, they will also go after them. That if we do that and we do it consistently, then we get rid of, we'll be able to, get it. But and that's the point that is not. That's what is not happening now. That for me is the danger that this portends. That may have, but in fact, for me, two clear dangers that this portends. One is that you are laying a precedent if nothing, if you do not address what has happened, this breach, this security breach that has happened. If you do not address it, you are creating a precedent. You are saying that yes, although we may know that that all of you are doing these things, hush hush, but it is now okay to even be brazen about it. Okay, that's the first danger. The second danger is the danger about the ability of individuals, including foreign interests, to be able to then subvert our different architectures and our different infrastructure. Uh, is, it, is it going to be the next time? Is it going to be the transport infrastructure? Is it going to be the banking infrastructure? Is it going to be the stock exchange? And so on and so forth. And what is the capacity of these elements? What is the residual capacity of these elements to actually cause damage? We don't know now, which is why beyond El-Rufai's case, there is a need for actually a very broad-based investigation and interrogation of all of these processes. This is the time that we should press a reset and say, how secure are our infrastructures really?
Now, there was a coup that was foiled, and now the NSA's office tapped. What is the danger really for a country trying to get itself towards development and matching the advanced countries? Because if we're this fragile, we're still fighting insurgents, bandits are there every day, and now with this new business, because like you rightly said, the danger is being a president and opening a new market. What is the danger for Nigeria, for the people? And while playing opposition, where do we draw the line?
I think that for me is why I say that we should hold our political class responsible collectively. Because look, everywhere in the world, no matter how politicians fight, they have basic minimums that they will not tolerate. Which is why you can see people, they will say, oh, people from across the aisle or across party lines, by partisan position, on an issue, they will say, oh, no, 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 that has crossed the line. Because there are some minimums that they have said that, look, no, no, if we go below this, we're actually undermining all of ourselves. So and that's the danger in Nigeria now. Because you also mentioned fragility. The fragility of the Nigerian state. It's not because the Nigerian state is actually not strong, or does not have the capability to deal with the issues that it's being contended with. Yes, that state has been hollowed out over time, where this business of the state has no business with business and so on and so forth. All of these things has hollowed out the state, eh? But it still remains a very huge bureaucracy and a very powerful state. The challenge, the fragility of the Nigerian state results from this fractionalization of the Nigerian state. The fact that different components of the ruling class eh, have cornered different components of that state and use it for their own. That's what makes the Nigerian state very fragile. Otherwise, it's very huge and immense machinery that can actually be put to use. People talk about, for example, when we talk about insecurity, for instance, and people talk about policing, and they say, oh, we have only 330,000 police. Eh? Let's be clear in our minds, really. Eh? If we had 330,000 police personnel, if they were like, we have 30, how many states? If you're 36 states,
36 states.
let's assume that you just have 10,000 personnel in each state. They're trained, they're well equipped. They will do a lot. It will go a lot. So it's not the numbers, but it's because the, their ability to function cohesively as a unit is being daily and constantly undermined by people who have access, people who have power. That is why it's police that will come and resolve a land dispute. It's police that will come and resolve problem in the compound and the rest of that. But things that you don't need to, So, but because people can weaponize the state, and that's why that's it's actually. So what I'm saying in essence is that it is the degree to which the state is weaponized that is responsible for the fragility of the Nigerian state. And that's what we really need, to deal with. That's why we are facing all of these challenges that we are facing. That's why the state cannot act. That's why they talk about the lack of coordination. You can't act together because people have different instructions from different components of the state. Now, and that's dangerous, very dangerous. But when people who are actually not holding any institutional position also begin to retain
It's kind of
and use those
power.
kind of powers, then it means we have really gotten into a situation where if we are not careful, we will not be able to get ourselves out of it. Because that would be like just creating multiple states within the state, and multiple states.
So your last words now will be advisory. You know what has been said. They can be taken away and they're like evidence and references. What would you say if you were to see El-rufai now? What would you say to the NSA Rubadu now? And what would you say to the Nigerian public moving forward from here?
I would say to politicians in general and then opposition politicians in particular, that yeah, it's important that it's important to play politics, but it's also important to be sensible, eh, and be strategic about how we play politics. The so IDEC has announced the date for the presidential and gubernatorial elections now, February and March 2027. So it's just a year. Okay, this is the time to start addressing real issues on the ground. This is time to start focusing on real progress. So if you are opposed, for example, to the tax reform, this is the time to now very clearly state what is it that you are opposed to and what would be your alternative if you are in power. If you are opposed to, if you are talking about the Electoral Act and constitutional reform now, if you were to be elected into power today, in 2027, what will be your constitutional reform agenda? What will be your electoral reform agenda? This is the time to have that conversation because the period of electioneering campaigns is the only period when citizens are enabled to participate massively en masse in policy debates. But that's what has been consistently denied citizens in Nigeria. Because rather than have those, look at 2023 election. The conversation was about Muslim ticket and North-South divide and the rest of that, Christian, and not about the
Away
real
from
issues.
issues.
Not about, it's away from those issues. So that would be my advice to politicians in general, and politicians in general. To El-rufai, I would say that people should be very careful. That those who live in glass houses should not throw stones, because I mean, yeah, the extent to which they have accumulated power and authority in this edifice called Nigeria is also to the extent to which they are also vulnerable. Because if this country collapses, there is more at stake for them than there is for ordinary citizens who, in any case, have learned to survive. So, my advice to such people will also be that they should act less with impunity, eh, and act more with political sensibility. Now, what would be my advice to Nuhu Ribadu and the security architecture? without prejudice to the fact that whether they should go after the individual, eh, directly or not. I think it's a wake-up call. This is the time for that security architecture to actually undertake a very comprehensive and thorough audit,
Forensic.
forensic audit of the security architecture in terms of access, in terms of vulnerabilities, in terms of who, authorized or unauthorized,
And more
can
checking.
and then put more checks in place for that. So, and that was that should lead to investigations and prosecutions, because part of the challenge in this country is that people get away, you know, with what is wrong, and so they build up. So for me, this would be my advice. And then to Nigerian citizens, I think that for the Nigerian electorate and the Nigerian citizens, we need to start asking real questions. Yes, politics cannot be separated from sentiments, because what is political is also sentimental. Okay, but it's not everything that is sentimental. Okay, that is also wishful. You can be very sentimental about facts. You can be very sentimental about the truth. So it's for the Nigerian citizens to open their eye and shine their eyes. Ask the proper questions. Okay, because we also, without our intervention, we are not going to help these politicians. And if we don't help these politicians, we are not going to help our country. Because ultimately, we are the ones who will bear the burden of whatever
The
happens. So
decision.
exactly. So we need to be more young persons, for example, say, and since NSAS, for instance, in 2020, we've had 5 years, 6 years for that to emerge. Where is a non-partisan but political youth agenda in Nigeria? That you can say, okay, this is a youth political and economic agenda that is minimum, that all young Nigerians align with, and that they mobilize all, so that regardless of what political party you are in, it becomes the basis for you to engage in that party. If that party is not going to give this to young persons, or it's not going to build a Nigeria that will enable young persons to thrive on the basis of some of the demands that you have made, you have no business in that party. So it should be something that is clear, that a basic minimum youth manifesto. What is it that young Nigerians want? What is the vision? What is the vision of Nigeria's young persons about Nigeria, the country that they want to live in, the country they want to lead, the country that they want to grow their businesses in, the country that they want to then start their families in. What's their vision of that country?
But what about the likes of the obedient movement?
Particularly them, because it's not enough to have a movement, to have a business. What is the agenda? What is it that people can relate with? And so the first thing is, and it takes discipline. That is it. It takes discipline. It takes discipline, organizing, coordination, to be able to have a consensus amongst different users and say, okay, this is what we all, regardless of where we are. And then you have this, then it now takes even more discipline to be able to now convince other people who are not young people, eh? Political parties, to say, okay, to negotiate, and then say, okay, this is our charter, this is our demand, this is what we need to do. So for me, that's really what is necessary, what is important now. It's so in Nigeria today, there are three movements and three political agendas, three political charters that we require, on the basis of which you should have movement. You need a youth charter of demand. And then, yes, and then you need a youth movement that is political but non-partisan, so that their members can belong to different political parties and push that youth agenda wherever they are. We need a women's charter, a women's manifesto as well. Because when we talk about gender things and we talk about all this that we're talking about, There should be, where is the women's political movement that is pushing this so that they are talking with the same voice in the different political parties? You know, I expect to see a situation where women will speak with one voice on certain issues, regardless of their political affiliations. There should be such minimum agenda. And we used to have this under the military. I mean, I grew up with a Nigerian youth movement that has a youth agenda. I grew up in a Nigeria where there was a women's charter. We had women in Nigeria that had a political charter in the anti-democracy, anti-military pro-democracy movement. Okay, and then the last one, which is actually the more important one, is you also need a workers' charter of demands, a workers' political and economic charter of demands that will be championed by workers. And when I say workers, workers and the organization. So when I say the organization, it's not just trade unions, because those are not the only places where workers are organized. Workers are also organized in cooperatives and whatever in their communities. So workers' organizations, we need to have like a minimum charter and say, look, as Nigerian workers, or as people who are aspiring to be workers, or as people who have young ones that are going to be workers, you know, what is it? What is our vision of Nigeria? And at that point, and then begin to engage with the political parties with this, regardless of which political parties we then individually, because we can agree, for example, that we should have we should not that unemployment should be less than 5% in the country. Okay, but I can have a program that wants to address that as a socialist or a social democrat, and you can have a program that wants to address that as a market-oriented person.
They can
Okay, so
come.
we should be able to belong on the basis of our ideological something into those two something, but agree that we want to reduce unemployment. That's our basic minimum. That unemployment should not be, and the poverty, for example, poverty rate should not be higher than this in the country. We should be able to agree on certain minimums, and then of course find our different pathways to then make sure that
Yes,
we can achieve that.
this conversation isn't about personalities. It's about whether Nigeria is governed by law or by memories of who once held power. Thank you, Mr. Jai, for your time, and we'll be calling on you again on further conversations.
Thank you so much for having me.